Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Dawson Wainman. I am the Director of Student Life for the Frost Student Association. I'm joined tonight by Adam Folland, who is co-hosting. He's the President of the Frost Student Association. And our special guest tonight is Braden Evans, PhD. He's the Program Coordinator for the Conservation Biology Program and Faculty for Ecosystem Management at Fleming Frost. He's an expert entomologist and has done studies into nematode use as a biological control on the marijuana industry. He's here today to discuss cricket shit, murder worms, and other parasites. We're very excited to have you here. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much for the nice intro. So I'm gonna show my face for a minute and then I'll get it out of here. So let's see, get my camera. I think I recognize most of the names here, but for some of you that maybe don't know me by face, this is me. Hello. Can you guys see me? Can you see my face at this point? Okay, great. All right, so this is me. If you'd see me around campus, I'm out and about these days, at least 2 or 3 days a week. Don't be shy, say hello. I'm relatively new to the Fleming world, so I'm happy to get to know Fleming's excellent students. Now I'm going to turn my camera off to not take away from the presentation too much, because I get animated sometimes. I move my arms around, I flail around. Okay, so just kind of shove some things over. All right, so yeah, so my name is Braden Evans. I put PhD after my name. I got into the habit of that. I noticed some other professors doing it, but you guys don't need to mention it. No big deal. But I'm really pleased that the FSA thought of me and invited me to speak tonight. I think this is a great series. What a great opportunity to get to know some of your faculty and also just maybe learn about some things that you're not necessarily learning in the classroom. So hopefully I'll have some fun anecdotes for you guys. And you know, for me, it's kind of nice to talk about insects because part of my role as a college prof is being sort of flexible. And so I'm teaching a broad range of courses, a lot of courses where I'm, you know, developing my expertise, where I don't necessarily have years of experience. And so a lot of the times those courses don't involve insects. So this is kind of fun because I get to have a, you know, a chance to talk to some students about, you know, the area where I've been sort of trained. So yeah, let's get into it. So I got a whole bunch of topics today. I think I'll probably be talking for about an hour, give or take, but certainly want to keep it informal as I do in the classroom. So, you know, if anybody has questions throughout, I'm happy to, well, I want to engage with you guys. All right. We're going to start out talking a little bit about biodiversity because insects play a big role in sort of our understanding of that. We'll talk a little bit about life of an entomologist, tell you guys about my weird and circuitous career path. Then we'll get into biological control. All right, you guys will find out a little bit about that specific area in entomology that I've been working on over the years. Then we'll talk about nematodes as biological control agents. I'll touch on cannabis a little bit. I've done a little bit of work with the cannabis sector, but mostly consulting, but that's okay. And then, of course, title of the talk, something I'm just getting into. I'm going to touch on cricket shit a little bit. We're going to talk about insecticide resistance. And then I'll show you guys the savagery of the insect world. Some interesting and quirky fun aspects of different groups of insects, stuff that, you know, hopefully will be kind of fun anecdotes for you guys to take away. So yeah, thanks for joining me. And we're going to cover a lot of ground tonight. All right, so biodiversity. Why should we care about biodiversity? Are we facing any issues relating to biodiversity right now? Where does that rank? does biodiversity loss rank in terms of you know, some of the challenges that we're facing as a society today? Number two after habitat. All right, that's a good answer, Alex. Xander, sorry, buddy. And so, you might say habitat loss, biodiversity loss go hand in hand. Some people kind of put it 1-2 with climate change, right? These are the two, it's one of the top couple major environmental issues we're facing today, right? And so think about biodiversity around the world. We're at a stage now where we've described some 1.74 million species, okay? And what our estimates tell us is that that only covers about 20% of what's out there. So there are 80% of species that have not yet been described. Now, as you can imagine, there's probably not a lot of, undescribed bears or ungulates or large mammals out there. Most of those 80% undescribed species tend to be pretty microscopic, right? We also have some estimates that suggest to us that 40% of the world's economy is reliant in some way on global biodiversity, and that biodiversity meets 80% of the needs of the poor, as it is derived from biological resources. So I don't think, for our audience tonight, I don't think this is really news, right? You guys have a pretty good handle on this stuff. You've probably heard of some of these ecosystem services in your lectures, in your curriculum. Having a broad, rich species diversity in an ecosystem can serve to protect water resources, soil, nutrient storage and cycling, breaking down and absorbing pollution in our wetlands, for example. We have this major contribution to climate stability, right? Rich biodiversity means, healthy carbon sinks, right? As we are currently experiencing sort of more frequent and more intense climate events, right? Having a robust biologically diverse ecosystem helps us recover from those things. Then we have these direct uses that we get from the biodiversity that surrounds us: food, medicine, pharmaceutical, drugs, wood products, ornamental plants, and so on, right? Just the diversity in the genetic basis of our populations, the populations that surround us, can play an important role in the benefits that we gain. We also have these sort of less tangible, but also, very important benefits: research, education, tourism, the cultural aspects of biodiversity that can be really sort of thrilling for us, right? Okay, so here's a pizza. All right, it shows the proportions of the different life forms on Earth. Okay, and so this is breaking up sort of the number of species out there for the different life forms. So we've got some plants and animals in there, different groups of animals. What do you guys think the orange chunk, that big piece of the pie there, represents? Oh, Xander, you're all over it. Inverts, Adam, I like where you're going. Nematodes, insects. All right, you guys are all on the right track. So it is inverts, okay? This one, in this particular case, we're looking at inverts. Take a look at invertebrates, our spineless beastie friends, right? In comparison to all of the plants that have been described. All of the vertebrates, that's what's indicated in blue there, okay? And all of this sort of mixed bag, the rest. Inverts are overwhelmingly the most speciose, right? The most species diverse group of living organisms. Now let's break it down to just the animals, okay? So if we look at just the animals, you can see insects take up 3/4 of the pie. There's almost 1 million species of insects that have been described, okay? And look in comparison, let me grab my marker to annotate here. There's 5,000 species of mammals out there, right? We think fish are pretty diverse. There's 30,000 species of those. Amphibians, 6,000, and so on. All of our vertebrates fit into this little piece of the pie right here, right? Good question, Dawson. I don't think that last chart had fungus in it. So maybe not every life form on Earth. It's, yeah, multicellular plants and animals. So good caveat there. But the point is, when we look at, our multicellular animals on this chart, insects are overwhelmingly, the most species-rich group by a mile, right? So what am I saying? I'm saying there are more insect species than all of the birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, fish, spiders, scorpions, corals, crustaceans, worms, mushrooms, lichens, algae, all of that combined, okay? Everything else that's out there, we got more insects than all of those things combined. All right, so just by show of informal poll in the comments, which of you knew that, and who did not know that? Just say a yay or nay in the comments whether you were aware of this. You knew, you're aware. Some of you guys, maybe in my classes, I've already kind of pumped some of this up to you guys, but all right. So most of you had some idea, right, of the incredible species diversity of insects, right? But still though, right, this guy gets all the attention. This is where everybody focuses, their sort of sentiment when they're the insect king. I wish that was a great big, fly maggot or something that he was cuddling up to. Wouldn't that be nice? Because that would be representative, a little more accurately of, what's really out there, right? So we've got this tiny drop in the bucket that is, that is the mammals, the smallest little sliver of our pie, but they do get the bulk of the attention, right? They get the lion's share, so to speak. And I think we can understand that on different levels, right? Why do we care so much about mammals? Well, they're a little bit more like us. What I hope to do today, though, is to bring insects a little closer to your hearts, all right? So maybe we can start thinking of insects in some of the ways we think about mammals. So what do entomologists do? I ask this question all the time. When I'm introducing myself to a class, I'll say, hey, so I'm an entomologist. What do you think I do? And people always come out with study bugs, right? That's the general understanding. There's nothing wrong with that. That's correct, but you can certainly get, pretty specific in the field of entomology, right? We've got medical entomologists that really focus on the diseases and various pathogens that are carried and transmitted by insects. As you guys are maybe aware, biting flies account for more human deaths than any other animals on the planet, right? We have forensic entomologists. I think there's still a forensic entomologist at Trent. So somebody nearby there that would be focused on looking at the colonization of cadavers by insects and other invertebrates, right? And by, very precisely tracking the life stages of fly larvae, of maggots, right, in a corpse, you can get a sense on sort of how long that corpse has been around. Veterinary entomologists dealing with domesticated animals, wildlife, and their interactions with insects, insect pathogens. I remember a few years ago when I was living down in Florida, there were these beautiful little key deer that lived down in Key West, subpopulation of white-tailed deer, very small, kind of typical of what we see in the tropics, right? Smaller representatives, smaller subspecies. And every so often there'd be an infestation of screwworm flies that would come up from South America. Maybe they'd show up on some imported agricultural product, and they'd start attacking these key deer. And it was pretty heart-wrenching to see these flies that basically burrow into the deer's face and kind of eat away at them, and eventually they get to the brain. So big eradication efforts, led by veterinary entomologists. That's the kind of work that they would do. Forest entomologists, for those of you studying forestry, you may have already taken a course on forest entomology. We deal with forest pests there. And then getting a little closer to what I've done over the years, agricultural entomologists is where the bulk of entomologists go. This is where most of the money and research is focused because, hey, we got to eat, right? And we dig into these agricultural ecosystems and we might work on physiology, insect physiology, chemical ecology. So the volatile compounds emitted by plants, right, that insects key in on with their antennae. And then what I do is biological control. So this is, a form of applied ecology where, we're really looking at interactions between predators and parasites and so on in agro ecosystems. So, Xander, great question. What would someone who's studying invasive species of insects fall under? Well, that's such a great question because actually all of these groups of entomologists touch on invasive species. So for me, my PhD thesis was focused on a fly that came over from Europe and Asia, and it was doing damage to some important economic crops here in Ontario. So like all the crucifers, like broccoli, cauliflower, all those delicious things my kids love to eat. There was an invasive species that had come over and just went crazy on our crops. Forest entomologists, yeah, pest outbreaks, you get some relocated, some stories you guys are really familiar with, right? Emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, a lot of species that affect forest, gypsy moth. Same with veterinary, I mentioned the introduction of screwworm flies, and so on. So all across the board, invasive species are a big focus for entomologists. Okay, so let me tell you guys a little bit about how I got here. So this is my strange career path. And I think it's a nice time for you guys to maybe hear this because you're kind of in a transitionary period in your life. I tend to maintain that people with circuitous career paths, so people who don't necessarily follow a straight line, they tend to have some interesting stories to tell. Now, I'm probably biased because I am one of those people, all right? So here's what I did. So I finished high school. I went to the University of Guelph and I loved it. I studied biology, like general biology. So I was into environmental biology, lots of insect and ecology stuff. But I also studied immunology, virology, molecular biology. I was into some like medical applications of biology. I was really into statistics. So I studied sort of this broad base of science when I was an undergraduate. And of course, I took that super fantastic biological education and my $20,000 student loan that I came out of Guelph with, and I went to work for Ford Motor Company. Now, it seems ridiculous, right? But I'm a francophone French speaker living in Toronto, which is kind of a scarce commodity. Ford needed to hire, someone who spoke French, and they said, we're just going to look for a graduate, a university grad, a college grad, someone who's demonstrated that they could start and finish a tough undertaking, and we'll show them, we'll teach them about the car business. So I spent almost 10 years there, and they sent me to York University's Schulich School of Business, where I did a MBA degree, a master's in business administration. I studied finance and economics. Really interesting time for me. It was not at all my passion, okay? Not at all what I love to do, but I was getting paid. I was paid off my student debt, and I was learning a lot. They then sent me over to work for Jaguar Land Rover, and I learned about finance, marketing, sales, operations, all these different areas. But after a while, your heartstrings start to tug at you, right? And I thought, holy smokes, my career is really evolving down this path that I'm not sure I want it to continue moving, right? So I took a big risk. I had, some financial responsibilities, and I said, forget it. I reached out to my old prof at the University of Guelph, and I said, hey, remember back then, way back when I said I wanted to do my PhD under you one day? She said, yeah, but you've been out working in the car business all this time. I said, yeah, I know, but I think it's time. And I'm so grateful that, she took the risk, right? She said, okay, I'll get this guy who hasn't been doing much biology for the last bunch of years, and I'll get him back, and let's see how it goes, you know? So I did my PhD back at Guelph. I focused on organic management in organic agricultural ecosystems using nematodes and some pathogenic nematodes, which I'll tell you guys about a little bit later on. That led me to some really cool opportunities down in Florida. Some people love it, some people hate it. I fall in the camp of people who love Florida. And so I spent about 2 years down there working on some projects at the University of Florida. And then when I was coming back, I said, I want to settle down with my family here in the Toronto area. So I spammed some colleges. I said, I really love to teach. I really love connecting with young people. This is how I want to spend my time. And so I got a bite from Seneca. I sent them my resume. I said, hey, I can teach your ecology stuff. I can teach your bio stuff. And then I did the same thing here, which is obviously the best decision that I made. I reached out to Josh Feltham in the EM program. And I said, hey, man, I'm coming back, to Canada with my family. I've been away in Florida for a couple of years. I'd really like to get into teaching. Is there somewhere you think you can fit me in? So he put me through my paces and grilled me pretty good. And I guess he saw that, I was passionate about it, and he gave me a chance. And interestingly, with all of that work and studying I did on entomology, you know what it is that got me the job at Fleming? It was that I had a combo of economics and biology. Okay, so the first course I taught at Fleming, and I'm still teaching it today, is the 3rd year EM economics course. I've taught it 3 times now, and I love it. It's one of my favorite courses. But I'm telling you that this kind of long, drawn out, windy story of my career to say, like, it's okay to take some tangents. It's okay to kind of, have a route that isn't necessarily a straight line, and never underestimate the complementarity of your skills and experiences, okay? Meaning, if you did something totally unrelated to where you're going, it'll probably still help you out. And you just got to find ways to make it work for you. All right? So here I am now. I consider myself one of the world's very few trilingual left-handed entomologists with a background in finance. All right, you dig hard enough, you can say, I'm super unique in this way, right? And so that's kind of the story of how I arrived in entomology and ultimately teaching in college. So I do biological control. This is, a form of applied ecology where we're exploiting interactions among predators and prey, or parasitoids and hosts, or pathogens and hosts, okay, to manage insect populations in agroecosystems. So what is a monoculture? Who can tell me what a monoculture is? Because this is what agroecosystems kind of fall under, monoculture. Yeah, no diversity, right? Exactly. So you're growing like the same plant over and over and over, right? And so you're very susceptible to this kind of disruption, right? These some sort of impacts and effects that'll throw the ecosystems way off balance because you don't have the resilience of a diverse ecosystem. So agroecosystems, highly managed, often, extensive monocultures, and you get some serious outbreaks, right? And so rather than apply pesticides to manage, exactly, Xander. So IPM scouts are heavily involved in managing. IPM is an acronym for Integrated Pest Management, okay? And those are some sort of entry-level jobs in the field of entomology. If you like insects, it's a great way to break into the field, and you're out there scouting for insects. You familiarize yourself with insect ID, and you're looking for outbreaks, basically. And what happens in these monocultures and these agroecosystems is that, you get a couple of aphids that'll arrive on your crops, on your plants, and within no time, in a matter of weeks, that population blows up to thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals because there's a shortage of natural enemies and there's an abundance of food, right? So they're having a great time. And so you need biological control entomologists to come in and, find a solution, right? Find something to manage the the problem. So here's a couple examples of biological control agents. We have lady beetles, a generalist predator that'll go out there and chomp up aphids. The adults and the larvae will do that. And then we have parasitoid wasps, right? So we've got a number of wasp species that are so host specific, they can only parasitize single species, individual species, which is pretty fascinating. So when I say biological control agents, I'm not talking about secret agents. I'm talking about fellows like this stink bug here, all right? That's what looks like maybe a Colorado potato beetle larva, okay? A beetle larva can be very damaging to a crop. And this little fellow will dine out on them. The heroes, the true heroes, Jessica, of our world. So this is a stink bug, family Pentatomidae, okay? They feed with that stylet. They'll pierce and suck the guts out of a number of different prey species. This handsome one here is a robber fly, family Acylidae, okay? And this is a really, really adept flyer. So they'll actually go up and pick off bees and flies and butterflies and moths on the wing. So that's another good generalist predator in agroecosystems. This beauty here is a tiger beetle, the number of different tiger beetle species here in Ontario. Really hard to catch up to them, but excellent generalist predators. What's that thing right there? Does anyone recognize that? Black with a little bit of orange, kind of fuzzy. Ladybug larva, nice. All right, Brienne, you had the right color combo. A lot of people don't recognize this as a larval lady beetle, okay? And so they are voracious predators of aphids. You can see this guy's about to dine out on one right here. And then you've got, yeah, they're lovely to have around the house in the garden. Then you've got sort of these dual threat, you know, sort of superheroes. If the predators are heroes, in this case, these are hoverflies or flower flies in the family Syrphidae, syrphid flies. The adults are pollen feeders, so they're important pollinators, and their larvae will actually do a real number on aphids and other pest species. So that's a hoverfly larva. It's basically a maggot with fangs, and it'll go into these heavily infested plants. And as you can see, with its piercing vampire-like mouth parts, it'll suck the guts right out of a juicy aphid there. So, and they'll go through, like, their handling time is so short. It's in a matter of, you know, less than a minute, they'll go through an aphid and they'll just keep moving, leaving cadavers in their path. So good to have, good to have. Here's a lacewing, another, you'll notice that the size disparity between predator and parasitoid and prey and host is pretty interesting. This lovely little guy barely feeds at all. This is a lacewing, but much like the syrphid fly before it, voracious predators for larvae. So really important to have in agroecosystems. Another important agent, yeah, Cooper. So now you know. So another reason to enjoy those hoverflies, those beautiful little, oftentimes looking like a bee mimic, right? Actually, I got some nice images of hoverflies to show you in a bit. So then the next layer of attack are parasitoids. So here you have this incredible diversity of often microscopic, but sometimes very large wasps that are specialized. Oftentimes they're host specific. So they'll literally, you know, parasitize one specific species of caterpillar, for example, right? And so they pick up on chemical cues to do that. And they can be really efficient as well, just plucking them off one at a time and laying an egg or multiple eggs inside of a host. This is braconid wasp, very similar to an ichneummonid wasp. You guys would be maybe familiar with some similar species of these, where they'll land on a tree and feel things out and actually detect a beetle grub inside underneath the bark and pierce through that with their ovipositor and parasitize a host insect that way. Some of them are these beautiful little iridescent wasps that are the size of, you know, the head of a pin, okay? Just totally microscopic. and they'll go after really, really small prey items. Here, these are actually stink bug eggs, okay? Some stink bugs are plant feeders, some of them are predators, some of them are actually omnivorous. But here's a little tiny chalcid, a wasp from the family Chalcidae, that is an egg parasite. So it'll go through that whole brood and drop one of its own eggs inside of a stink bug egg and do its damage that way. All right, and then on to maybe something, you know, I don't know if any of you found those parasitoids gross, but something that might be even more gross are the pathogens. But, you know, I think it's what makes them gross also makes them beautiful. So here we have what is called an entomopathogenic fungus. That's a mouthful, okay? This is a fungal disease. Yeah, like the fungus you'll find on, you know, you'll find some tree parasitic fungus, the chytrid fungus. We've got funguses affecting amphibians and bats and, you know, any number of species. Well, there are funguses that are fungi that are specific to insects. There's a cicada that's been attacked, okay? So these spores will land on their host, kind of wind blown, you know, or maybe direct contact, and then it'll form some hyphae that'll pierce the hard exoskeleton and colonize the body, and then it's game over, right? Here are some beetles that are basically completely consumed, and then, you know, this colony will form more spores, and they will become airborne and infect, you know, another group of insect hosts. So the interesting thing here is these guys are basically harmless to humans. I mean, if you're handling them to you know, a great extent, it might be an irritant, like an inhalant irritant, but really no harm to people. Now, another pathogen, the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart, is entomopathogenic nematodes. Okay, so just like the fungus, they're like a disease-causing agent of insects, specifically targeting insects, but these are nematode worms. And this picture doesn't look great at all. Those are all those little white flecks are individual nematodes that look like that under the microscope, really microscopic. Good question, Brienne. They slow down. With nematodes, they're dead within 48 hours. With fungi, they can last a little bit longer. Love it. You're ordering nematodes for your houseplants. That's fantastic. Yeah, these are a great alternative to you know, chemical pesticides, particularly if you're dealing with insects that come into contact with the soil, right? Because these are typically soil dwellers. This is a nice looking image of some nematodes emerging from this wax moth larva. For anybody who's got a pet reptile, you may have, you know, come across wax moth larvae, wax worms, they call them in pet shops, right? They're commonly reared insect. They're just about almost as common as crickets, right? They are like the white lab rat of the nematode world, okay? Anybody who does nematode research, you're dealing with wax moths, or wax worms, I should say, wax moth larvae, right? Okay, so let's get into nematodes a little bit. Now, I talked to you guys about you know, insect diversity and abundance. Well, we'll get into nematode abundance, and you might be surprised just by, you know, how abundant they really are. So there is no, you know, simpler multicellular animal out there, right? Look at this thing. It's literally like a bag of water with a gut that runs from the mouth to the anus, right? They just like feed and have really strange reproductive habits, okay? But there's nothing complicated about them. There are over 1 million species, although the estimate is over 1 million species. The large majority are undescribed. There's only a little fraction of these that have been described. So, you know, earlier on, Adam Fallen mentioned, oh, I think that's the nematodes, that big piece of the pie. Well, they would be the group that would, you know, come closest to the insects, but they're just so much less studied that there's a lot fewer described species out there, okay? Now, they are literally everywhere. They're in marine ecosystems, they're in freshwater ecosystems, they're in terrestrial ecosystems, and then they're in all of us, right? They're inside bodies. That's another important environment and ecosystem for them. There's often, some pretty complex life cycles where they might jump around from one host to another. And so their abundance and their ubiquity means they're found everywhere, right? Sort of uh, motivated E.O. Wilson, a famous ecologist. He's considered the father of biodiversity. It kind of spurred him to coin this phrase, we live in a nematode world. It's a nematode world that we live in, right? And so what he's getting at is that they're literally everywhere. They're under your fingernails, sorry. Not always, but they can be, right? They're inside of our guts, they're inside of our pets, they're inside of our fruits and the roots of our plants. They're literally everywhere. They're the most numerically abundant animal on Earth. So when I talked about insects, I said that's got the most species, right? But in terms of actual numbers of individuals, nothing comes close to the nematodes. The estimate is that 4 out of every 5 animals on the planet is a nematode. Okay, so they're so numerous. And at least half of the animal species around the world are host to one species-specific nematode parasite. What does that mean? About half of the animals out there, including us, right, have an association with a parasitic nematode that exists nowhere else. It doesn't exist in the wild. It doesn't exist as free living, okay? These are little beasties that live only inside specific species. So there are human nematodes that could never live inside of a dog, for example, right? There's this nematode here you're looking at crawling out of this ant that could not even infect a similar ant species. So they're totally species specific. Adam, that's a great question. There's a lot of, and they can affect us in many different ways. And there's just a few that I would say are considered like medically important, but there's a lot that could colonize us. Not saying that we're walking balls of nematodes, but they're out there. So we live in a nematode world. They're not all tiny. So some of these, you guys might recognize the odd slide here because I've slipped some of this material into some lectures. Some of the stuff that I find kind of jumps out at me. So Placentonema gigantissima was isolated from the gut of a sperm whale. The Sakhalin Island is like out where Russia and Japan sort of intersect, right, off the North Pacific there. And so this is a 30-foot long individual here in the jar. How do you like that? How would you like that crawling around in your guts? So that came out of a sperm whale. Oh, Brienne, you asked such a wonderful question. Why would they have evolved to be, so species specific? Well, if you think about transmission, right? Like almost like it as though, because they're like a parasite, right? They're like a disease. The odds of finding a mate, if you're not free living, if you're relying on your host to get you around, your best bet at, finding others of your kind is to come into contact with them through your host. And so typically you have this like co-evolution, right? This species that evolves alongside its host over the years that may not start out as being completely species specific, but it adapts and adapts over generations and generations to a point where they're completely reliant on the host. Can you touch on some of the effects nematodes can have in a host? How often are they symbiotic? Well, good question. They have symbiotic associations with different organisms. When we get into entomopathogenic nematodes, they have a strong symbiotic association with some bacteria that they themselves carry around. So they're nematodes that parasitize insects, but they themselves are colonized by some bacteria. Effects range from like no effect, okay? A lot of the gut nematodes have literally, are basically asymptomatic, right? That's where you find so many of them inside of like mammal hosts, and they just kind of live happily. They've evolved not to kill their host off because that's, essentially sort of ending their own lifeline, right? And then there's some other really interesting effects, like there are horsehair worms, which I actually am going to show you guys a little bit later, that will actually, infect the brains of their host, trigger like a thirst response, and send them to water so that they can crawl out of their host in an aquatic ecosystem. So the effects are really wide ranging. Not too many are medically important. One thing that, if you have kids of a certain age, you may experience pinworms. That's something that infects the digestive tracts of human beings, and it's really common all around the world. So they're there. I mean, it's just something we got to get used to. Here's one that yeah, the world is amazing. When you start to look at things that you need to see under a microscope, it can be really fascinating. Here's one that I thought you guys would really like. So this is a Loa worm, can be disease causing, very treatable, not endemic here in Canada, but it's in parts of Asia and Africa, where you have a nematode that will, enter through a wound in your leg and make its way to your eye. Cooper, I think I spotted a horsehair worm in a pool in a cave a while back. That is awesome. That's probably what it was. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a little while. Okay, so nematodes are everywhere. What about these entomopathogenic nematodes I keep talking about? So I'm going to refer to them as EPNs, because if I say entomopathogenic nematode too many times, I'm going to start slurring my speech, okay? They are, parasites of insects, disease-causing agents of insects. They have a symbiotic relationship. So symbiotic means mutually beneficial, right? With enteric just means gut. So bacteria that live in their guts, okay? And actually, this association is really interesting. So nematodes themselves can't really do anything to insects. When they penetrate the insect that they're attacking, they can't do anything. They actually have to expel or vomit their bacteria into the gut cavity of the insect host. And it's the bacteria that actually will kill the insect, okay? And then the bacteria and nematode will work to kind of break down the insect, liquefy the host, and then now it's in a form that's consumable for the nematodes, which can reproduce in really high numbers. So sometimes I've heard entomopathogenic nematodes described as a biological syringe. If you think of it this way, like it's the vector, right? It stabs the insect, gets inside of the insect, but then it actually needs to release these bacteria. So it's the contents of the nematode, the bacteria that are inside of it, that do the killing. Hopefully you guys, you haven't had dinner too recently, or you're not bothered by this. That'd be even better. But they're described as an obligate vector-borne disease of insects. Obligate means they have no other way of reproducing, okay? They can't reproduce as free living. I'm eating right now. Right on, Xander. Love it. You guys are all getting into it. All right. Glad to have you here, Madeline. All right. So here's an unfortunate host. Okay. There's a beetle larva that has been parasitized, and you can see the nematodes have reproduced in some number, right? So they occupy this, what's called a biological middle ground. So they're kind of half pathogen, half parasitoid. And parasitoid is, essentially the same thing as a parasite, but it just means that it kills the host every time. Parasitoid is a parasite that always kills the host, because not all parasites kill their host, right? All right, they can be really important in high value crop agroecosystems, and this is where the interest in the cannabis sector comes in, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. The beauty of it is all of the nematodes that attack insects are totally harmless to people. You don't need PPE. I don't even use gloves. I have mixed up a batch of nematodes in a bucket by hand, okay? Like they're literally no risk to us, all right? That's the beauty of the species specificity that you were asking about earlier, Brianne, is that, there's really like no harm. All right, and you avoid, all the potential issues with contamination, harm to pollinators and so on, right? So as a management tool, as a natural enemy in a biological control program in an agro-ecosystem, they've got a lot of benefits. And many times a biological control agent will take, up to weeks to kill their host, but the nematodes can kill their host within 48 hours for sure, and far less, sometimes overnight. All right, here's the basics of the life cycle. There is one free living stage, and that's called the infective juvenile stage, okay? So that's the stage that crawls around in the soil looking for an insect to penetrate, to infect, right? They're juvenile, so they can't reproduce. So they're basically useless in the soil other than being able to go find their host. They find an insect, boom, they'll enter through either a natural opening, or some species of nematodes actually will pierce through the body wall, okay? And they'll get inside. First thing they'll do, release their bacteria, right? You mentioned before that it usually isn't the interest of the nematode to kill their host, but it seems some do. What happens to the nematode once their host is dead? Move on to the next. Great question, Brianne. So you're right. Oftentimes, over many generations, parasites evolve to be less harmful to their host, right? Not the case with entomopathogenic nematodes. They basically have they have no choice. They have to kill their host. So they differ from many other parasites in this way. And if you think of the common cold, or different bacterial infections that humans deal with, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's in the interest of that disease-causing organism to not kill the host, because that's what allows you to keep going. So in this case, they do kill the host every time. Their bacteria do it, okay? The insect dies. Nematodes start feeding on the liquefying remains of the host and reproduce like crazy. And their reproduction strategy is it's something. First of all, here's a question for you guys. Let's see your deductive thinking here. Now, when a nematode juvenile first infects a host, it'll develop into an adult, but that adult is hermaphrodite. It's a giant, well, relatively giant compared to the infected juvenile, hermaphrodite that is self-fertilizing, right? So it's got male reproductive parts and female reproductive parts, and it fertilizes itself. What is the evolutionary advantage of doing that? To literally yourself. Doesn't have to leave the host to mate, right? So independence, you don't need anybody else. And so if you think about it, it's really hard work, right? It's tough. It's tough out there in the soil. Exactly, Adam. That's what I wanted to say. It's tough to find someone else of your species, right? And so imagine going through all the work of digging through the soil. You finally find a host. You penetrate the body wall, right? You're like on your last breath, and there's no one there. You're at a one-person dance party. So as a reproductive strategy, right? There you go, Madeline. Everybody can try it, right? But as a reproductive strategy, that makes a heck of a lot of evolutionary sense, right? That you can, if there's a pretty good chance that you get inside of a host and no one else is going to be there, you better have a way to fertilize yourself, right? And that's what these things can do. Another really cool factoid, if you have a look over here, you probably can't see my marker. I'm marking this side up. You can identify infected hosts of certain species because the bacteria bioluminesce under UV light. So that's another really cool thing, is you can see some bioluminescence of the bacteria. Okay. All right. So symbionts, you guys were asking about symbiotic relationships. Well, in this species complex, the symbiotic relationship is between the nematode and the bacteria that it travels around with, right? I wish we could bioluminesce too. So the nematodes are useless without the bacteria. The bacteria produce insecticidal toxins, right? And they also produce some like antibacterial and antifungal stuff, antibiotics. Why would they do that? So bacteria get in the insect host, all right? Nematode barfs them out, and they basically produce this stuff that kills the insect right away, okay? And then right away, they start producing antibacterial and antifungal. Yeah, so how do you mean, Brienne? So how are they protecting themselves in this way? Right, exactly. They want to keep everything else out. So exactly, because you know, you got a dead insect sitting around in the soil. It's like a you know, invitation to, you know, fungi and other microbes in the soil to come and colonize that, right? So the interesting thing is you'll see this dead caterpillar, this dead larva sitting on the soil for like a couple of days, and it's outer the walls of its body remain intact. It looks like kind of freshly dead for a couple of days, and all the action's going on inside, but there's nothing colonizing it from the outside. So you're keeping the competition out, right, by doing that. And then the nematodes themselves actually secrete something that reduce the immune response of the host. So they help the bacteria do its work. Okay, so there's like some sort of two-way help going on. The interesting thing is, in the lab, some researchers have produced what are called azenic nematodes, so nematodes without any bacteria in their guts, and they can't kill their insect host. They can get in there, they know enough to, you know, penetrate an insect host, get inside of it, but they can't kill it. And also, the bacteria that live inside the nematodes have never been collected from the soil. So it's really like an obligate, a necessary association. Another point I'll touch on for nematodes is, you know, they're commercialized. It's pretty amazing, this complicated system that we were able to harness. One of the things I love the most about it, though, is, yeah, you can produce them with bioreactors and artificial diets and things like that, but you can also go old school, produce these things with very sort of low-tech equipment. And if you think about the you know, the needs of the developing world in terms of crop protection, this is a real tool and an opportunity for you know, countries where they may not have access to the high-end equipment required to produce nematodes in vitro. They can do it in vivo. You just get some juicy caterpillars, infect them, and then scale them up, right? Through reproductive cycles. You can collect them in, literally you need some form of petri dish, some water, and some insects, and you can get like hundreds of thousands of nematodes out of it. So kind of a cool opportunity for countries that you know don't have access to maybe some of the really expensive equipment. They can still produce some important biological control agents with minimal technology. Okay. Okay, so what's this about cannabis? So I've mentioned cannabis a little bit here. So it's actually an interest, you know, been an industry of interest for me since 2018, right? When Canada went out and said, hey, we are going to make cannabis legal for possession, cultivation, consumption, and so on. Cannabis and some byproducts, right? They just said, forget it. We're not going to fight this as a contraband product. We're going to try to, you know, commercialize it, you know, have regulate it, have a controlled industry, and maybe create some opportunities for people as well. And so this was really interesting for someone like me, an entomologist. I was actually just coming back from Florida at that time. It's like, oh, wow, overnight, this brand new industry sprung up, right? So greenhouse cannabis production blew up. There was a lot of funding, a lot of interest, a lot of people saying, hey, let's get into this new market. Let's be among the first entrants, the first producers, right? See if we can get a leg up on the competition. And so there was, you know, a lot of existing sort of cultural knowledge, you know, people that had maybe been involved in cannabis production in you know, outside of the legal system, but there wasn't like formal scientific research, right? So insect nerds like myself saw it as, hey, this is a cool opportunity. I can lend some of my expertise to cannabis producers, okay? Obviously, a lot of demand when cannabis became legal. There were estimates of about $7 billion in sales last year. The best part, again, from a purely biased entomological lens, the federal government and Health Canada was being very careful, right? They said, we want to protect consumers. We want the cannabis that is, cultivated legally in Canada to be sort of, have low residual insecticides. So they really limited the amount of insecticides that could be used. And so that meant lots of opportunity for biological control. And so, a lot of the pest problems that come up in cannabis are managed by biologicals. Second best part, of course, there's these new pests. That's not so great for cannabis producers, but for entomologists, it's kind of exciting, right? Because you get to work on a new system. So one of the ones that's kind of been on my radar over the last couple of years is the rice root aphid. They're highly polyphagous. Does anyone know what that means? Win for everyone. What does polyphagous mean? You guys heard that term before? Basically means it feeds on, yeah, exactly, Cooper. Eat anything. That's right, Adam. So they love, many different species. They're flexible, right? They can feed on lots of different species of plants. They love grasses. They love hemp and cannabis, okay? And they're kind of different from most other aphid species that tend to focus on the leaves and the higher stems. These guys live around the base of the plant and actually live in the root system as well. So that close contact with the soil suggests, hey, nematodes could be a good fit, all right? But here's what I found so far. I've had some really productive discussions with a variety of cannabis producers. Work myself backwards from coprophagy. All right, there you go. Phagy, you're on the right track, guys. Understandably, I guess, right? The government, really puts a lot of pressure on research institutions to do things carefully, right? They don't want people growing cannabis all over the place under any kind of circumstance in high quantities, in high volumes, right? They're limiting, what you can do. So, you need some expensive research licenses. And also, a lot of startups in this industry made it a little bit unstable. So, I would have like some real productive conversations with the director of research at a company and then find out that, a week later that the company was going to fold, right? Or, some investors would be really interested in funding some entomological research, and then they wouldn't be so interested. So when you have such a novel industry, such a new industry that's, dominated by a lot of startups, it can be tough to kind of settle down and get to work, right? They're really focused on production, ramping up their business, and research becomes a secondary interest. So what I found so far is that, I've had a lot of cannabis companies interested in my expertise. They like to talk. They like to have me on as a consultant, join them in meetings sometimes. But, I think it'll be a little bit of a slow go to really get a research program off the ground. That said, I'm really grateful for all the conversations and consultations I've had with cannabis producers, because that led me to this gold mine right here. The cricket shit part of our presentation today, guys. Why cricket shit? Well, because cricket protein. We're so much more interested in feeding on or eating crickets, consuming crickets, right? We are sort of, basically catching up to the rest of the world, right? So like 2 billion people out there have been, including insects as part of their regular diet for a long time, right? And so, the West, our attitudes here are starting to change. We're starting to recognize, hey, this is like some really good, healthy, lean, nutritious protein. And guess what? It's a little better for the environment than than produce. I'm loving the comments, by the way, guys. I love it. Than producing beef, right? And so a whole bunch of startup companies are turning their attention to crickets as a source of, protein powder, protein bars, even just, roasted seasoned crickets, right? And you can see if I run down this list here, there's a whole bunch of sort of, nutritional pluses. So a lot of companies are out there positioning themselves saying, hey, we want to produce some good food, some healthy food, and we're also able to produce this stuff in a fairly sustainable way, right? So there you go. Madeline, you were an early adopter. Some years ago, had a cricket powder smoothie at the X. Love it. So, it's something that we've kind of come around to, right? Mango and crickets, phenomenal. But the actual cricket shit though, right? So I'm talking about cricket protein here. So the way we call it frass, okay? I say cricket shit, it's frass. And so I think I know who you're talking about there, Adam, with the you ate crickets. Yeah. And so I've been working with a company called Aspire Food Group, AFG. There's also Entimo Farms, which is actually not so far from the campus, right? They're producing crickets on a massive scale, but with crickets comes cricket shit, right? Cricket frass. And so, at the beginning, a lot of these cricket operations would pay someone to get rid of their cricket waste. So now they say, wait a minute, we can integrate this into our business model. We can monetize our cricket shit. And so what they're evaluating now is the potential to use cricket frass, or another word for cricket shit, as a fertilizer product. And so that's where I come in. So I've actually got my first research grant working on a project with Aspire Food Group. And so what I'm curious about is if we want to use cricket frass as a fertilizer, a soil added fertilizer in organic, horticulture and agriculture, what is the impact going to be on the nematodes that I like to use to infect my insects, or the mycorrhizae, the fungal root associations? So as you guys know, even though agroecosystems are highly managed, there's still a rich ecosystem going on in the soil there. So when you're adding something, my hypothesis is that, adding cricket shit would be a lot less harmful than adding like a synthetic fertilizer, right? But, the thinking is, let's take a look. Let's see. Maybe there's a synergistic interaction. Maybe nematodes are even better at finding insect hosts when cricket frass is around. And so that's the question I'm trying to answer in relation to cricket shit. All right. I'm gonna get to some, let me just see, I'm kind of babbling on here, guys. You've got all these interesting comments. I am gonna get to some, I do want to get to some kind of interesting insect fact stuff. I got time, all right. I want to get to some interesting fact stuff pretty soon. So I'll just run through a little bit quickly. Another concept, there's a different concept that involves some of my research in Florida that I think you guys might find interesting, okay? And so, okay, sounds good, Adam. So when I was down in Florida, I worked on this little beastie called the two-spotted spider mite, TSSM for short, okay? They're highly polyphagous, as you guys know, lots of host plants, they eat a lot of stuff. And they're also highly fecund, okay? Which means they have high fecundity. They lay a lot of eggs, they have a lot of babies, right? This is, yeah, Cooper, you're not alone. I think most people, anybody working in some kind of ornamental, horticultural area, you've been dealing with these, right? They're cosmopolitan. They're everywhere. They're everybody's headache. And I was down there working in strawberries, and they're a huge problem for strawberry producers down there. Now, one of the biggest issues with spider mites, so this is our spider mite here, whoops. Tetranicus urticae, okay, that's the species, spider mites. Look at this. This guy Van Leeuwen did a like a summary. He went through like hundreds and hundreds of research papers looking for which is the problematic insect that has the biggest incidence or the highest incidence of resistance to chemical applications, so chemical sprays, okay? And Tetranicus urticae, the spider mites, were at the top of the list, okay? Almost 400 cases, 92 different chemicals that they could resist, okay? They could develop resistance to. So do you guys know this concept of resistance, what that's all about? How would you explain resistance? Anyone have an idea? sort of starts out with, you might spray something to kill off some bugs on a leaf, right? So that's what we got here. Becomes so awesome, right? So it's like the Fleming students, man. You guys handle all this stuff the profs throw at you. You become so good, nothing can touch you. All right. And so imagine this, okay? So here's, insect spray guy, okay? Spraying a miticide. It's actually not an insecticide, it's a miticide on this leaf. And all these ones that have the white genotype, right? They're all dying off, right? But guess what? There's a couple of resistant genotypes in there that survive. And then you go a month later, you go, wait a minute, they're all coming back, right? I thought I killed these guys. Let's spray again. Okay, you knocked off like half the population this time, but all these other resistant ones, right? These ones that survive. Now they're increasing in number. The ones that are reproducing are the ones with the survival genetics, right? And then you get over to this third application or this third population bounce back, and it's like, uh-oh, we've got a resistant population. All right. So this is a common problem in, traditional, pest management, right? And so there's a few, oops, sorry, I jumped ahead. There's a few kind of interesting quirks about this, okay? So the thing about two-spotted spider mite is, yeah, they produce a lot of babies, all right? They're highly fecund. They have a super short life cycle, a matter of days or weeks, and they carry out Arenatochus parthenogenesis, okay? And what that is if it's kind of like the nematodes. If there's one mother mite, one female mite that lands on a plant, they don't have a lot of range, right? They can't travel too far. So if there's no suitable reproductive partner nearby, she'll produce some unfertilized eggs that'll hatch into males and mate with her sons. Sounds a little creepy, but it's effective if you're an insect. But all those strange life habits actually lead to or contribute to, this development of resistance, okay? So here's what I was working on down in Florida. One of the problems was, God has left the chat. Sorry, guys. Your ears are being, contaminated by my terrible, terrible lesson here. But one of the problems is that a lot of our strawberries in the summertime, they're grown up here in Ontario or in North Carolina. They're grown up north because it's too hot in Florida. And then at the end of the season, you dig them up and you ship them down to Florida. And then Florida produces fruits from those plants all winter. So the strawberry season in Florida is down from like October to, I don't know, like March, something like that, okay? And what happens is you get people treating plants up here in Canada, California, North Carolina with insecticide X, right? And then they don't talk to the Florida growers who then, might treat it with the same insecticide. So there's this supply chain issue, okay? So when is going to be a course at Fleming? Hey, Xander, ask the question, all right? There's an invert biodiversity class now in the Con Bio program, which is awesome. But for the rest of the programs, it'd be great if we had some more insect courses. I'll be working on that for sure, guys. Anyway, there's this supply chain issue. I went out to prove, here's me and my buddies down in the field in Florida. We used this precision kind of sprayer called the Potter Spray Tower. We zapped these poor mites with some chemicals, but really we were out there trying to prove that, hey, if you keep this system going, you're growing plants in Ontario, shipping them down to Florida, you're spraying the populations with the same chemicals, you're gonna get resistance. And what I was looking for is this, what this graph shows is 50% mortality. And what I was looking for is if the concentration required to kill 50% of the population was getting higher and higher. So down on this axis here, basically saying it takes more spray to kill these guys now. That was the basis of my research. And sure enough, what this table shows is that, yeah, the stuff that got, sprayed more than once, got sprayed in Ontario and then got sprayed again in Florida was leading to resistant mites. And then the last check that I did, I said, let me see, maybe we're so effective, we're not shipping mites around, around the world. and I screened these samples. I can't tell you guys how hard I scrubbed these plants, me and my research assistants, all right? We scrubbed thousands of plants, and we looked at these 100 plant samples, and we counted any mites that we found. And what we found was that whether they came from California or Canada or North Carolina, there were always mites on the strawberry plants that we were shipping around, okay? So that was the Florida research. Now I'm going to give you guys a few cool facts and let you get on with your evening. But here's some, a bit of a hat tip, okay? So this guy, Alex Wild, is amazing photographer. The link is here. Well, just Google Alex Wild photography. There's some unbelievable images. This photographer has made their photos freely available for profs, okay? So if you're going to use them for educational purposes, unless you use these incredible quality photos. So I just want to, tip my hat to this individual and send you guys to his website, because you might find something interesting that you want to order a print for. There's some amazing, amazing shots. Okay, so we're going to just kind of go through some random insect images, and we'll talk about weird life cycle stuff and weird habits. So the first one is guess that insect. What do you guys think we've got here? What are we looking at? Don't be afraid, circle of trust. I don't expect you guys to know this, but if you were to say, lump this in with a group, the flies, the beetles, the wasps, something related to earwigs, that back in the day before I was an entomologist, that's exactly what I thought of these guys. Xander getting very specific. All right. Liberace beetle. So these are beetles. They're Coleoptera. So a lot of people don't recognize that because the traditional carapace, right, those hardened outer wings, the elytra, are basically cut in half. So most beetles, they would cover the abdomen completely, right? So this is called a rove beetle, pretty common throughout Eastern North America. This one's a tropical species on the right. But you flip a log looking for salamanders, something like that, and you'll be like, "Ooh, that's a weird looking earwig." Well, now you can tell your friends it's a rove beetle, predatory beetle. All right. Now, we talked a little bit about life habits, so I thought I'd show you guys this, the beautiful miracle of life, the birth of a parasitoid, something that, may kind of stay with you a little while having seen this, but pretty amazing, right? The host remained alive right up until, sorry, Brian, but so much more now, right? Yeah, Cooper, that's a great observation. So when you look at the size of the parasite relative to the host, it's pretty incredible. Imagine that'd be like, cruising around with like an 8-year-old inside of you, right? When you think of like relative size. Amazing that it stayed alive all that time, right? So that's basic parasitism. That's just kind of regular, plain old parasitism. This one, I think I've shown this to some of you guys before. This is called hyperparasitism. Now imagine this. Here's a parasitic wasp, okay? And it's found this group of aphids here on a plant. And there's this nice, sprightly looking, healthy aphid here, okay? And this one here doesn't look so good, right? This is what we call an aphid mummy. This aphid it's dead. It's already been parasitized by a wasp. And what this wasp species does, it's called a hyperparasite. It actually preferentially lays an egg inside of a parasitized aphid and parasitizes the wasp inside of the aphid, okay? And it leaves the healthy aphids alone. So it wants its baby wasp, it's gonna lay it in right here. Its baby wasp is gonna feed on the remains of a parasitic wasp that's already inside of that aphid. That's kind of cool. How about this? This is pretty wild, okay? These are called ant mugging flies, all right? So they'll cruise in, they'll follow these, these ant colonies that follow these well-worn trails, right? And they'll be out foraging and collecting food. So these ant mugging flies exhibit what is called kleptoparasitism. They're food thieves, okay? So they'll come up to an ant, grab it, pin down its antennae, okay, with their own antennae, and then jab their mouth parts, the fly's mouth parts, okay, in between the mandibles of the ant and force it to regurgitate its food. So this is what like ants do to each other, right? They'll regurgitate food and pass it along. Well, the ant has figured, or the fly has figured that out. And by jamming its mouth parts into the ant's mouth parts, it forces regurgitation and then eats what the ant had collected. Pretty fantastic. Yeah, pretty rude. It's a ruthless world out there, guys. So that's kleptoparasitism. Here's something, Cooper, I think this is what you were referring to, right? So these are very closely related to nematodes, not quite nematodes, they're filarial worms, horsehair worms, as we call them, right? And they tend to specialize on orthopteroid insects. Orthopteroid means like a few different orders or a few different groups of insects. That includes like walking sticks, grasshoppers, crickets, and mantids, kind of that group, okay? And so they'll parasitize insects as immature worms, all right? And when it comes time, when they've reached like sexual maturity, they're ready to reproduce, they'll tap into the insect's brain and, you know, initiate this like thirst response, and the insect will go flop down in the nearest puddle. It could be a puddle, a pond, a river, a swimming pool. It could also be like your toilet at home, right? If it's an insect inside of your house. So it's not uncommon for someone to find like a horsehair worm cruising around the bottom of their toilet bowl and they get freaked out, right? They're like, was this a parasitic worm inside of me? But not at all. It was probably from like, you know, a silverfish or a cricket that had gotten in the house and it, you know, led it to that source of water. So don't be afraid, all right? No horsehair worms colonizing us. These little beauties, these are ambush bugs. They're ambush predators and actually very common, very common in our part of the world, in Southern Ontario. When you've got these big fields of goldenrod, take a look around. You'll see the hanging cadaver of bees and wasps, sometimes yellow jacket wasps, sometimes these big Polistes paper wasps, these big bees and wasps that are being taken down by this tiny little guy. He's got these super strong forelegs with raptorial hooks that'll just like dig in and sort of artfully avoids getting stung and sucks the guts out of these prey items. This is like an art festival that just messes you up. So very common. If you're walking through goldenrod on campus, I guarantee you there'll be loads of these around. So take a look. If you see a dead wasp hanging off of a goldenrod flower, you're probably looking at this cute little ambush bug that's feeding on it. All right. Yeah, that's awesome, Cooper. Yeah, for sure. You would have seen some on campus if you were looking. What about this? Brood 19. You guys have probably heard of periodical cicadas before, right? So these cicadas, you know, they're from the genus. There's about 7 different species from the genus. I'm seeing some serious enthusiasm. 7 different species from the genus Magicicada, right? And that's right, Brianne. So they've got, depending on the species, some are 13-year cycles and some are 17 years, right? And so imagine trying to study this, knowing your brood, okay, 13 more years and I'll get to my Magicicada again. Of course, there's some that come out every year because there's different cohorts, right? Think of it as like, you know, a group of Fleming students, right? There's the first years this year, they all move on to second year, then there's the first years next year and so on, right? You scream for the trees, I love it. And so this brood 19 is like one of only 3 13-year broods left. There's only like 3 cohorts left for the 13-year cicadas, okay? Brood 19 is made up of like 4 different species. So it gets complicated. So you get this mass emergence of cicadas all at once. And some of them even look very, very similar. But, you know, you can distinguish them by some, you know, some real small anatomical feature, and actually their calls can be distinctive as well. So a new species was recognized in 1998, but you can imagine why, right? It takes a while for some research to come out on these guys because you just don't see them for a long period of time. So it's an incredible synchronization, if you think of it, something so simple, this six-legged spineless invert with that kind of synchrony. It's incredible. All right, something you may or may not know, the mantids that we find in Ontario are introduced, okay? We've got European mantids, like the one, that green one there on the right. We've also got, especially in the southern parts of the province, Xander, I know you're down by the Windsor area, the Chinese mantid, yeah, even bigger than the mantids that we see up around campus, okay? Those are all introduced. They're from Europe, they're from Asia. They are hummingbird killers. They'll eat at just about anything they can hold on to. The only native mantid species we have in Canada is the ground mantid out in BC, this little guy here on the bottom left, okay? So just an interesting factoid for you to share with your friends and family. Come across a praying mantis in Ontario. It's a naturalized introduced species. I wouldn't call them invasive because they're not really disrupting, any native species, but they're introduced, that's for sure, okay? All right, blister beetles, bombardier beetles. We got beetles that shoot burning acid out of their anus to defend themselves against predators, okay? That is an important trait to have when you're about a half an inch long. Another interesting, factoid for you to share with your friends. And actually, these blister beetles, like they'll leave a mark if you're handling them and they decide to shoot you with their this complex compound that they shoot out. Yeah, there are some here in Ontario, all throughout North America. So check it out. Squeeze a beetle, see what happens. All right, another interesting fact, and I touched on this already, but like the different life stages have such different life habits. So here you've got this dainty, beautiful, elegant looking lacewing, that green winged individual on the right. Okay, that's an adult, but their larvae are like murderers. They are aggressive predators particularly, and actually they're drawn to agricultural ecosystems because they're drawn to high concentrations of aphids and other soft-bodied insects. Here you've got one sinking its jaws into the larva of a lady beetle, a ladybug, right? So that adult is just, yeah, antlions and lacewings, kind of similar, pretty similar. They're different groups of species, but very similar habits as well. Similarly different. Antlions as adults look almost more like a damselfly, and they make those, those sand pits, right? Which I'm sure you're familiar with, Cooper. All right. Speaking of synchrony, right? We talked about cicada synchrony. How about these guys? So let me flip back to this. So hang on. Right. So take a look at the map there. That is the emergence of mayflies out in Wisconsin, captured on radar. Take a look at those shots below. Those are all adult mayflies that have come out. Now, a similar theme, okay? Yeah, Jess, I know you're from North Bay. Lake Nipissing has some huge hatches seasonally, right? So probably in June up by you, where you'll just all at once, right? You'll get this huge emergence. And the idea there being similarly, with the hermaphroditic nematodes, right? You've got adult mayflies that don't even have functional mouth parts. They emerge and they exist as this winged adult for like a day, 2 days tops. Your window is so small to find a mate and reproduce. Your only chance is to do so when everybody else is out there. So it's like a great big party for a couple of days. You've got a few staggering on either end of it, but one massive peak emergence, huge reproductive frenzy, and then they're gone. Okay, and these are insects that live in aquatic ecosystems for up to a couple of years as immatures, right? Okay, cannibalism, there's a caterpillar. Wait, I thought those were herbivores. Well, they are, but if they're deficient of some nutrients, whoa, the same thing here, same thing here. All right, if you're hungry and you're an herbivore, it's okay to eat your fellow species individuals, you know, apparently. Mantids, as I probably shared with most of you guys, the males have some sperm blockers on their cerebral ganglia, right? So actually being decapitated by the female during mating improves the rate of sperm flow. It actually improves the chances of fertilization. So it's a good thing for mantids when the female eats the male during copulation, okay? How about this little beauty here? Are these, what's this thing? Anybody know what this thing is right here? Let me just mark it. What's this guy? You guys recognize that? Yeah, man, not a bee. Mantid fly, mantis fly, mantispid. Yep, those are all, you know, names for these insects in the family Mantispidae. All right, they're part of the same order as lacewings. Okay, and they're showing a few different things here all at once, right? So I've got the wasps over here to kind of, you know, try to throw you off as if you guys would bite on that. You knew better, but we're seeing a few things. We're seeing convergent, you get a lot of them in light traps. That's really cool. We're seeing convergent evolution. So you see the shape of this head, looks like a mantid, right? These raptorial forearms, looks like a mantid. They're not related to mantids at all, okay? So they've just happened to, you know, evolve the same features, okay? That's called convergent evolution. We're seeing mimicry, right? So they're imitating a species that some predators do not want to mess with because they might get stung. These guys are harmless to larger predators, and so their best bet is mimicry, right? Mimicking some wasps, right? Specifically these Polistes paper wasps, and aposematic coloration, warning coloration. That's where the bright yellow comes in. It says, hey, I'm dangerous, don't eat me. So some pretty cool, few cool things going on there. Here's almost done here, guys. Sorry, I ended up talking a lot longer than I thought I would. Appreciate your engagement though, it's awesome. Okay, what about these? Has anyone seen one of these before? They're cute, right? Very adorable. Okay, very 1980s hair, sort of like a what's it called? Like a glam rock band type hair, right? From the 1980s. I wish I could grow my hair out like that. These are mutilids. The common name is velvet ant, and they're actually wasps. What you're looking at are the wingless females. The males are winged, okay? They're fuzzy and adorable, right? Obviously, very common down in like the southern US in arid environments. They like sandy soils and that kind of thing. However, they've got an extremely painful sting, okay? It's up there on the, geez, I forget the scale. There's this entomologist out there who has like a pain scale. I'm sure the Brave Wilderness guys consulted with him, no doubt. And they parasitize bees and wasps. So solitary bees that, you know, burrow into the sandy soil, they'll actually lay an egg next to their larva and you know, eat the baby bees from the inside out, okay? Thought it was the other way around. It really depends on the group, Brianne. Great question though. Yeah, you've got some where the females are winged, other ones where the males will kind of seek out their mates. So it really depends, you know. And you've got that phenomenon going on with aphids, but then in the Hymenoptera, which are the bees and wasps and ants, typically it's if there's only one winged sex, it would be the males. All right, how about this? Biomimicry and divergent evolution, right? So these are syrphids. I think it was Cooper earlier mentioning he'd seen some syrphids. These are, you know, important pollinators, little hoverflies, bee flies, flower flies. You got a whole bunch of different names for them. But they've evolved biomimicry, right? This one looks like a honeybee. This one looks like a wasp. This one looks like a solitary bee, right? So they're warning, they're saying, I have defenses, don't come and eat me. And it's very divergent, right? So these have a common, they're all in the same family. So they have, recent common ancestor, but they look very different, right? This is where you get an idea for the species diversity among the insects. Okay, we're almost done. I think this is my last slide. Quick hat tip to Xander, who's here today. Xander, you shared some photos of a friend, a colleague. This is from your area down in down by Windsor. I think this was from the Ojibwe Prairie, right? Or park. And so these are pink phenotypes of a green katydid species. So katydid is a type of long-horned grasshopper. They're grasshoppers, but they've got long antennae. They look a little different. And there is a pink phenotype, a pink genetic variant that occurs in the US. And yeah, no, that's really what they look like, Madeline. And it's crazy that there's actually 4 of them here, because it's a genotype that is not rare. Okay, it actually occurs in a good number of individuals, but because they stand out so much. Imagine these guys trying to camouflage on green plants, right? They don't know any better, and so they get picked off by birds. So they have a very low rate of incidence. Light trap finds in the tall grass prairie. That's awesome, Xander. You've got a heck of a playground out there down in southwestern Ontario. But yeah, so they're not uncommon, but they don't make it to adulthood in very high numbers just because they stand out so much, Yeah, maybe they specialize initially in pink flowery area. I would bet, right? So you can imagine, like, I don't know, on a magnolia tree or some tree with those hues. That's not that uncommon, right, amongst plants in our area. So you could certainly hypothesize on how this has evolved to be a thing that persists in the population. Super interesting. Okay, so guys, thank you so much. I'm just going to give you a little tip here for those of you that have an interest. How do you get involved? Well, guess what? It's not like sampling, sharks if you happen to be into marine biology, or it's not like trapping, wolves if you happen to be into, large mammals and predators. If you're into insects, it's super easy and inexpensive to get involved. Grab a field guide. The 2 that I've got here, Kaufman's and Peterson's, can be really great for the eastern half of North America. Get a cheap butterfly net and just get out there and observe, right? Get out into a goldenrod is so rich in stuff. It's a great opportunity to see something different. Entry-level jobs are available. I see them on Indeed all the time. Mostly it's scouting work in agriculture or the cannabis sector, but it's a great way to get your foot in the door in entomology, right? Where you're kind of working in cropping systems, working in greenhouses, looking for insect problems, and you might, have an opportunity to network yourself and maybe expand your entomological horizons. It's one of those fields where, if you're into nature and you're into ecology and ecosystems, there's a little bit more funding, or maybe I should say commercial economic application for entomology, because there's this economic interest in the agricultural sector, right? So there are maybe a few more jobs out there if you're willing to sort of have a look around. So really appreciate your interest, guys. You guys asked amazing questions. Just a lot of fun to talk to you guys about insects. Do you have any other final questions or anything else you want to ask before we sign off for the night? And I'm really sorry I talked for so long.
Don't apologize. This has been great. I have a question. Back to nematodes.
Yeah.
I was a little curious on nematodes' effect on aging, or aging's effects on nematodes. So do nematodes build up in your body throughout your life, or is it sort of as your body deteriorates, you're not as suitable of a habitat, so the population would diminish? How would that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I'm kind of guessing, because I'm not, in terms of like the human aspect, I'm not so well versed. But I know that as we age, our immune system becomes less resilient, right? So we've kind of got, nematodes floating in and out of us over the years in small numbers, right? Unless you were like noticeably sick, you don't have a nematode problem, right? But as you get older, I would think that it's possible that you'd be more likely to have like an outbreak because your natural immune response would be sort of less robust as you get older. So that's my guess as far as that goes, but I couldn't tell you with like complete authority.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, you guys are so great. Appreciate your kind words there.